I rank the 6 hidden steps between your tap and your photo by how much they change the image. Number 1 is not what you expect, and number 3 is something you look past every single day. One tap looks instant, but the picture the sensor actually hands over is nothing like your photo. It's dark, speckled with grain, and the colors are wrong. So here's the real question. What happens in that invisible split second that turns garbage into a gallery shot? That hidden work is the real camera. Start at the front door. Light passes through the lens and lands on the image sensor, a flat grid of about 12 million light buckets. Each bucket is one photo site. Its only job is to sit open while the shutter fires and count the photons that fall in, then report a single brightness number. Here's the catch. It counts light, but it's colorblind. It knows how bright, never what color. And these buckets are tiny, roughly 1 micron wide, 1/100th the width of a hair. A smaller bucket catches less light. Less light means a weaker, noisier signal in every one of those 12 million wells. That grain you saw, it starts right here in the physics of a bucket too small to fill. So we have 12 million brightness numbers and 0 color, which raises a problem the whole photo depends on. How does a colorblind grid ever see red? Here's the fix engineers bolted on top. Over every single bucket, they lay a tiny colored window that only lets one color of light through. This checkerboard of red, green, and blue windows is called a Bayer filter. Look closely at the pattern. Half the windows are green, a quarter red, a quarter blue, twice as much green because your eyes are sharpest there. So now each bucket isn't colorblind anymore, but it's gone the other way. It can only see its own color. The red buckets are blind to green and blue. The green ones are blind to red and blue. Each of your 12 million pixels just recorded one color channel and completely missed the other two. 2/3 of the color at every point is simply gone. Which sounds like a disaster. A full-color photo built from pixels that each saw only 1/3 of the truth. So how do you rebuild a full-color image from that? You guessed very cleverly. This step is called demosacing. For every pixel, the processor looks at the neighbors that captured the colors this one missed. A red pixel surrounded by green and blue buckets borrows their readings to estimate its own green and blue. Do that across all 12 million pixels, and every single point ends up with a real red, green, and blue value. This is the moment the picture is born. 12 million single-color samples become 12 million full-color pixels. The same count, but now complete. It's not magic. It's interpolation, the same way you'd guess the temperature between two thermometers. And because edges and fine textures live in the details, a bad guess here shows up as color fringing or mushy lines. Get demosacing right and the image looks sharp. But guessing 12 million times takes serious work. So what's actually doing all this math? Meet the engine rooms. Tucked inside the phone's main chip sits a dedicated piece of silicon whose entire life is photos. It's the Image Signal Processor, or ISP. Think of it as a specialized assembly line, not a general worker. Your phone's main brain, the Central Processing Unit, or CPU, is a brilliant generalist. It can do anything, one clever step after another. But demosacing and cleaning up 12 million pixels one at a time would take it far too long. Your photo would lag behind your tap. The ISP wins by being narrow. It's fixed-function hardware, wired to do a handful of image jobs and nothing else, on thousands of pixels at once in parallel. What takes a general chip a noticeable pause, the ISP finishes in a few milliseconds. That's the difference between a photo that feels instant and one that stutters. And it doesn't stop at demosacing, because a rebuilt image is still a long way from a good one. Now the cleanup crew goes to work. Remember that grain from the tiny buckets. The first pass is noise reduction. The ISP compares each pixel to its neighbors and smooths out the random speckle without blurring real edges. Next, the colors are probably off. Shoot indoors and everything picks up an orange cast from the light bulbs. So white balance quietly shifts the whole image until something that should be white actually looks white. Then comes the hardest trick. A real scene has bright windows and dark corners at the same time, and the sensor can't hold both. Tone mapping gently pulls detail out of the blown-out highlights and lifts the crushed shadows. So the sky keeps its clouds and the shade keeps its texture. 3 separate corrections stacked in order. Kill the grain, fix the color, balance the light. Only now does it start to look like a photo you'd keep. But the ISP has one more trick, and it's the strangest one. Here's the part that breaks people's mental model. When you tap the shutter, the phone doesn't take one photo. It's already been quietly capturing frames, several before your tap and several at it. Then it merges that whole stack into one image. Why bother? Because the noise in each frame is random. Line up several frames and the real detail lines up perfectly, while the random grain scatters and cancels out. Stack enough of them, and the picture gets cleaner than any single shot ever could. The stack does double duty. For a high-contrast scene, the phone grabs some frames exposed for the bright sky and some for the dark ground, then blends the best-lit parts of each. That's how one photo holds both a bright window and a shadowed room. So that fraction of a second wasn't one moment. It was a whole burst quietly gathered and fused, which finally explains what really happens between your tap and the picture. So run the whole line at full speed. Light hits 12 million tiny buckets, each counting brightness, each colorblind. The Bayer checkerboard gives every bucket just one color, throwing away 2/3. Demisacing guesses the missing colors back, turning 12 million single-color samples into 12 million full-color pixels. Then the ISP, that dedicated photo chip, denoises the grain, rebalances the color, and maps the tones so highlights and shadows both survive. And under it all, not one frame but a merged burst, canceling noise and blending light. Every step you ranked, firing an order in a few milliseconds. That's the answer to the real question. The instant your face-down phone feels like it just grabbed the moment, it actually ran an entire assembly line. 12 million pixels in, one clean photo out. So the next time your photo appears the instant you tap, remember what it really is. The image wasn't captured in one clean grab. It was computed step by step on a line that runs in the dark of a single blink. Your phone isn't a camera in the old sense. It's a tiny factory that manufactures a picture every time you press the button. That same burst and merge trick is exactly how night mode pulls a bright photo out of near darkness. The phone just holds the line open longer and stacks even more frames. That's the next box worth opening. Subscribe and we'll open it together.